All right, I've got Captain Stan, the Mosquito Man from Catchmaster. We're going to be discussing everything about mosquitoes and final feed. Hey, Stan.
And maybe who knows where else it might go to.
Right, because at our age we just have random thoughts. I just turned 50, and it just dawned on me that I'm over a half a century old, and that just
there, son. Easy.
Yes,
easy. You're talking to a senior citizen here.
Yeah, so I'm having like a typical midlife crisis. I just haven't bought the Porsche yet because I can't afford it.
One thing I just want to say is, I've had a long and nice career doing a lot of things. I'm having the most fun now teaching about mosquitoes to private industry and working for Catchmaster. So, just keep plugging away, and eventually you're going to find where you want to be.
Yeah, I know. I am. The last 2 years have been, with business, personal, just the whole issue of everything that's happening, been very stressful. But I found out more about myself in these last 2 years than I had in the previous 48 years of being alive. And I know really in my life what I'm really good at right now, and what I've been good at, and everybody's noticed it. And I just haven't. And my passion is really teaching and training. It always has been. That's when being on stage talking, doing a podcast, being in front of an audience, doing teaching, taking people by the hand. For me, that's the most rewarding thing in my life, more than the business. That's the stuff that energizes me. The business stuff is good, but
that's what you do to survive.
Yeah. Yeah, and
when you're in front of one of these audiences or doing what you do, and you see the light come on, and you see the appreciation that they have for gaining knowledge.
Yeah,
somebody comes up to you afterward, no matter how many times you've done this. Yeah. Somebody comes up and thanks you and says you made a difference in their career. That's what it's all about.
Oh, and you work a lot in this, because these are a lot of hours that I put in, and then I get the message for somebody says, man, I started my business because I've heard your podcast, and I've been in it a year now, and it's been totally successful. So that's the rewarding part about this, and the business is very stressful.
Plus, the other reward for you is you get to talk to people like me. I mean, come on.
Of course, I can't just.
That's a given.
Yeah, that's the best part of my day. I really do enjoy these conversations, because I just get, the more conversations I do have, I just get a greater appreciation for the differences of everything that everybody does in the industry. And I get to value more. It's almost like traveling. I mean, was it Mark Twain that says, traveling cures prejudice? And it's just one of these things, when I talk to people and I see their problems, their situations, I just grow as a person. So that's rewarding in itself, to do that. So but this is not about me. I brought here to talk all about you, because you're Stan the Mosquito Man. So I understand that you've had a military career, and I read a little bit about you. A lot of people have told me a little bit about you, but
that's not good.
Let's start. Let's go back to. Let's just go back to your mother's womb, okay? And how the heck
were you there? Were you that? You were the one that was there next.
I don't have any recollection, man. I don't have any recollection. But what have you been doing, and how did you end up eventually doing mosquito? Because it's not very common that just people end up doing just mosquito stuff. And how did you end up there?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I'm from a small town in Indiana, and I grew up, my father was a doctor. We were kind of the big fish in a little pond there. Everybody knew me and that kind of thing. And he had his doctor's office connected to the house. And so it was always assumed that I, like my older brother, would become a medical doctor. And I sort of realized early on I didn't think I was cut out to do that.
Right.
Didn't do great in high school. I'm the typical solid B+ student, just enough to get by there.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And I ended up going to Swarthmore College, a very small liberal arts school outside Philadelphia, where my dad had gone, where my brother had gone, where my uncle had gone. So I actually got into Dartmouth. I wanted to be a professional baseball pitcher, and Dartmouth had a pipeline to the big leagues. But my best friend from high school, who had also applied, didn't get in. So I said, well, I'm not going to go there. So when I got there, I realized again that if I worked really hard, and this isn't going to sound very good, but if I worked really hard and made really good grades, I'd probably end up in medical school. And I knew by then I absolutely did not want to do it.
Right.
But I loved biology, and I took a course there called Biology of Animal Communities, and we did things with electric fish and crickets, and we also replicated all of the classic honeybee experiments by Carl von Frisch, how the bees tell direction with the waggle dance and all that stuff.
Huh.
And I thought, well, this is pretty cool. But then I had like a solid B plus in biology, so I was able to, maybe think about doing something with it. And then I took a year off out of college and worked in a sporting goods store. And this is the serendipity here building now.
Okay.
Worked at a sporting goods store, worked at a summer camp, did maintenance on our apartment complex, just took a year off. And then the next year, my father sort of said, if you don't go back to school, I'm going to cut you out of the will. And that gets your attention.
Right, yeah.
And so I had a friend who happened to be in the entomology program at the University of Delaware. And I said, hey, thinking back to the bug stuff I'd done in college. He said, yeah, it's a good program. Why don't you apply? So I did. I sent out 10 letters. I got accepted to one school, the University of Delaware. So I became a fighting blue hen. Just in case you don't know, the Delaware teams are the fighting blue hens. See, you learned something today, Frank.
Yes, I did. That's exciting.
That was a regiment during the Revolutionary War from Delaware where they were the fighting blue hens. And that probably just scared the hell out of the British, right?
Right, yeah.
And so I went to Delaware and was in the entomology program. And I had a wonderful, we all probably have an instructor or a teacher or somebody somewhere who really flips the light switch on for you. And for me, it was a guy named Paul Katz, CAPTS. And he taught a course called Epidemiology of Arthropod-Borne Diseases, which basically means how do bugs spread diseases, right? And I absolutely loved it. And then I still didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated with my master's degree. And I was looking through a journal one day, and I saw an ad for to learn epidemiology in a public health setting or something like that at UCLA. And I thought, well, this sounds interesting. And I applied and I got in. So I fell into that, and the rest is sort of history. There I taught infectious disease epidemiology. I was a teaching aide for that. I taught parasitology. I taught helminthology, which is worms. And my degree, my PhD is in public health, and I studied tropical medicine and infectious disease. But I worked for a very famous guy who was working on mosquitoes. So the whole universe of mosquitoes, diseases, infections, all came together. So it's really a unique background. So then I said, well, what am I going to do now? I never thought I'd finish a PhD, by the way. I did not think that I could do it.
Right.
I was there for a long time.
That's amazing.
I didn't think I had it in me, and I was working on a project that was not very interesting. And then I went there in 1980, and about 1985, I was doing a lot of teaching, as I said, and staying busy and making money. There was an outbreak of malaria in San Diego, locally acquired, some cases of people who had never left San Diego. And we had been working in our lab on this particular Anopheles mosquito that it turned out was spreading it. And so I got to do a whole bunch of field work all over California, the Southwest United States, Mexico, mapping the distribution of this mosquito. And it was fascinating. And it was public health. And it was going to do some good. And I really got fired up in the last 3.5 years I was there. I don't even remember writing my dissertation. I mean, it was just...
Right.
But I do remember walking across the campus with 8 copies of my bound dissertation, and my feet never touched the ground. It was like the biggest get out of jail free card you can ever imagine. And then one day my dad said to me, son, you probably worked harder on your PhD than I ever did on my MD degree.
Wow.
That was very fulfilling. So, as I was saying, at UCLA, we had regular visitors going to Southeast Asia and coming back to the military labs and other research labs over there. And they would usually come by and give us a seminar because most of the time their flights would stop in Los Angeles. And my advisor knew all these people. And many of the ones who came through were military entomologists, Army and Navy. The Air Force doesn't really have research entomologists. So I'd hear all these wonderful stories and about working in the jungle and seeing cases of malaria and all these people in these really sharp uniforms. And I remember thinking, wow, if I ever join, I'm going to join the Navy because their uniform is a lot sharper than that Army. The double-breasted button Navy uniform. And the other thing that we got a lot of civilians who would come through, and they'd be wearing sort of shirts like this, open bottom, and have some dirty old dusty bag over their shoulder. And they'd talk about all the work they were doing overseas. And I thought, wow, this is very cool. And so I thought about it, and I was at a tropical medicine meeting or something, and the Navy specialty leader for entomology, that's the person who recruits, said, hey, I hear you might be interested. And so I sort of worked both sides. I'd have like lunch with the Navy guy, and then the Army guy would take me out at night. When you're a graduate student, you got to play these
hustle.
things. And, the deal is, you go in for 3 years, and then if you don't like it, you can get out. And I thought, well, that's pretty solid. And so I sort of fell into the Navy, and 23 years, 8 months, and 1 day, I think they calculated. Later, I retired as a, one rank below admiral, which isn't too bad for a bug guy.
No, it isn't. It's actually pretty good. There's hope for me.
Again, another piece of serendipity was, Jim Fredericks at NPMA?
I don't know him.
He's their technical director.
Okay.
He's also a Delaware graduate, although we weren't there together. And he called me up shortly before I retired, and he said, hey, do you mind? This was Washington, D.C., a stone's throw from their office for NPMA. He said, do you mind if Bob Rosenberg, at the time the executive director of NPMA, do you mind if we come to your retirement ceremony? I said, no, sure. Come on. And at the retirement ceremony, Bob Rosenberg said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm not sure. He said, send me your resume. So I sent him my resume. And about a day and a half later, I got a call from Terminex. We want to hire you. What's it going to take? It was total luck. And I'd been through this week-long class that the military gives you. It's called CAPT, Transition Assistance Program. And they teach you how to dress because, you haven't had to worry what you wear for the last X number of years. Right. We had a whole class on the different tassels on men's shoes. I kid you not, for an hour. Different tassels on men's shoes and what they might mean. We had a class on how to start a business and all kinds of things like that. Well, basically what that did was it kind of was scary. You're going back into the real world. And mine just happened just so quickly. So I put on my best white uniform, the one that looks like I'm an ice cream salesman in the Navy, the white short sleeve uniform. And I went down to Terminex and I interviewed with all their vice presidents. And I had 3 things on the table that I needed. And I can tell you what they were if you're interested. I mean, they taught us to negotiate. I said, number 1, you're going to give me my retirement salary plus 20%, which is not, small change.
Right.
And I said, number 2, I'm going to work out of my house in Illinois because my last 6 years in the Navy, my family lived here and I was in Washington, D.C., and that sucked. None of us liked it.
Right.
But pardon my language. And the third thing was I want to travel. I'm going to travel. I'm going to be on the road. I'm not going to sit at my desk. And they said, no problem. Would you mind writing your own job description for us? Because most people in pest control fit in a box. They're a termite guy or an ant guy, or they're this or they're that.
Right.
They say, you fit in all the boxes. And we're not really sure. So you write your own job description. So I did that too.
That's amazing. And
I spent 4 years there. But I got involved with Final Feed while I was still in the Navy, and we can go back and cover that because it's been with me ever since day one of that whole effort. So then after about 4 years at Terminex, they decided that they wanted to part ways with me. So I got the old 10-minute notice. You've got 10 minutes to clean out your office.
Wow.
You turn in your phone, your computer, everything, and they escort you to the door and you're gone. It's that fast. And I'd seen it happen to a lot of my friends, but I'm telling you, Frank, when it happens to you, it's humiliating.
Yep. I've had it happen to me.
And then I had worked at Terminex with a guy named Rick McDonald who ran one of the big supply warehouses there for Paragon. I'm wearing Paragon socks this morning, by the way. Here's one right here. You can almost see it. And he had left Terminex. This was when Terminex's big upheaval was starting, and they're still sort of suffering from it to some degree, I think. Anyway, Rick had gone to Catchmaster. And when he heard I'd been let go and Catchmaster was moving into these mosquito products, our mosquito trap and now final feed, he said, we got to get this guy. I mean, it was all, like I said, it was all serendipity and just, sometimes success is the meeting of luck and preparation.
Yeah.
And, in my situation, it absolutely was. And as I said, now I've got the best job I think anybody could have.
So let me cover it. What did you do for 20 years in the military?
23 years, 8 months, and 1 day?
Yeah. What did you do there?
Well, I was a medical entomologist.
Okay.
The military has about 130, believe it or not, uniformed entomologists. About 130.
Wow.
Probably 50 of those are in maybe 60 are in the Army. Navy's got about 40, and the Air Force has roughly 15. And a wide variety of things. We were stationed in Egypt for 2 years, Hawaii. And when you're in these units, you don't just have responsibility for where that unit is. You have a geographic responsibility, sometimes for the whole globe, maybe sometimes for half of it. So in the Department of Defense, when it comes to pest control, the DoD is considered the 51st state for certification and training. And if you think about it, you can figure it out pretty quickly. Those troops move around all the time. So they can't have to get a new state certification. So the Armed Forces Pest Management Board, which I ran for my last 4 years in the Navy, I was the head bug guy for DoD is a way to think of it.
Okay.
All the training and certification responsibility falls under that. So as a military entomologist, you do a lot of training, not dissimilar at all to what we do for private industry pest control to get their CEUs. It was almost the same thing. So you're really groomed to do that. You really learn how to work an audience, how to talk to you don't teach them what you know, you teach them what they need to know. And there's a huge difference.
Right.
We have a lot of people that want to get up and tell everybody what they know, not teaching, training.
That's my biggest beef, by the way, in everything that I've been studying for the last 13 years. It's all from a compliance perspective and from from a business pest control technician perspective, there is very little taught. And this is where I'm going with what I've been wanting to teach for so long, because I say, I can't, you teach a Purdue course is awesome if me as an owner or somebody wants to really get in-depth knowledge, but what the tech needs to know in the field is more urgent and more practical. And in this case, a lot of business is tied to it because a lot of customer service and sales, and it just isn't taught in any of the courses I've taken for the last 13 years.
Yeah.
From everybody. I've taken them from, you name it. I pay for any course that there is that will help me grow. And that's been a big problem. And that is what the industry needs more of. This is why I'm doing a lot of these podcasts with people like you and everybody else. I really wish we could get more into that of what they need to know versus I want to go to IPM conference in Purdue because I want to go there and I want to experience that for myself, but at the end of the day, how much is that going to be transferable to a tech in the field? And that I don't overwhelm them with so much head knowledge that they're not able to apply. And I don't know if you can speak a little further into that, because I find that fascinating.
Well, you really hit the nail on the head in our industry, and that is we don't have a lot of secrets. We all know what equipment's out there. We know what pesticides are out there. It comes down to what you said. It's service, sales, and how you treat people.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. Not too much different than everything else in life.
Yeah.
And customer service in particular. I mean, customer service is still a huge issue for a lot of companies. And it's for different reasons. There are generally at NPMA, or not so much at the more technical workshops like Purdue that you mentioned, where I've spoken a few times. They do have tracks on things like marketing, customer service. As a matter of fact, I was just looking at something online that's coming up. Oh, it's the NPMA's Academy, which this year is going to be virtual. One of their tracks is all customer service, so you can take a whole bunch of customer service courses.
Yeah, I just got that yesterday.
Talk about that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's out there. We tend to fractionate it a little bit, and oftentimes go a little more heavy on the technical, but that's because that's where the CEUs lie.
Yeah, and everybody. But one of the beefs, and if you have any influence with NPMA, I've been talking about this, and I've made several comments. The problem that happens is the brass tends to take it as a really sharp, harsh criticism versus here's what we really need from you. And the majority of the independent techs that are out here are not a member of NPMA.
Right.
The big companies, top 100, which is probably 50% of the industry, have all this figured out. The reason I do this podcast and I talk to people like you is because the average mom and pop guy, technician that is in the field trying to wear 5 hats doesn't have access to the resources. And when I look at that course and Stump, I wrote. I know she's a friend. She's in my Facebook group. She's also a member of my. I've invited her to be part of my group and my page because I want to talk to them about having a serious discussion about their. When I'm a member of NPMA, a lot of the stuff that they put out is not for the guy that has under 5 or 6 trucks on the road.
Correct.
If you're less than $1 million, they're totally irrelevant. And what I would like for them to do is to be able to understand that you're asking us to become a member because you need the support. But understand when you put out a course like the 2019 Academy that they're putting out, and it's $250, and the barrier to entry, when I read all the stipulations on everything to watch this conference, it's totally undoable. Between 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, every technician is out in the field working. They don't have recorded classes that I can say, I'll just buy the recorded class, take those classes, and then watch them when I want to watch them at 8 o'clock at night when I'm home, because I remember until last year working 16-hour days, getting home at night at 8, 9, 10 o'clock and just totally wiped out. There's no time for me to go take any of these courses. So I've been wanting to, and if there's any influence, to have a discussion about, this idea where you're going to pay this much if you're a member and this much if you're a member. I just taken 4 summits. The last summit was 160 videos on podcasting alone. I'll pay for it. I paid $260 for the whole course.
Yeah.
But I bought it, and now I can watch it whenever I want. I got 160 videos to go through. Yeah. So this is where you and I just had this discussion about that the real training, and saying people are not getting trained. You're putting too many barriers to the training. Make the training accessible when we want to take it, and the real information when we want to have it, and not when you feel like having a webinar at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or at 8 o'clock in the morning, when 50% of us or 90% of us in the industry are actually doing the technical work.
Yeah.
And I this is where I'm goading it, because I'm a goad to be polite. and I goad people into this action because it's the only way that I can get the change to happen is through my podcast and being vocal about it, because they're not going to listen to me, a guy who is in Florida who has 2 technicians, and saying you're not going to influence the industry. I'm going to influence the industry indirectly, and I have to go around you because you won't play ball with me.
Yeah. I learned a really good lesson several years ago when I was on the board of directors of the American Mosquito Control Association, and I was giving a talk in my region, giving what's called the AMCA update, the sort of canned promotional, here's what you get if you join. And there were probably 150 people in the audience. And I naively said, and how many of you are members of AMCA? 2 people raised their hands. And a couple of the old timers who knew me came up afterward and they said, you got to understand, we've got our state organization, we've got a regional organization. They give back to us. We have influence within those. All we ever hear from AMCA is we want your dues. And so it was a really good lesson that I have not forgotten.
Yeah, and that's where we're at today, where there's nothing going on in my state, my region for Florida Pest Management Association. There's nothing going on. I haven't gotten an email from them 6 months. They do 1 class. They don't even tell us what's being taught, who's teaching it. It's just, attend if you want your CEU. And
they just did a series of webinars, though. I did one of them on mosquitoes.
They did?
Through the University of Florida Pest Management University. Yeah,
which I want to be able to go over there too, and because I Phil Kohler and all these guys, I know them, and I really love what they put.
By the way,
he is. Oh, that's going to be sad. He's such a great teacher.
He won't go anywhere. I know Phil pretty well. I think he's those old professors. They tend to hang around and keep an office, and they don't have the committee responsibilities, and they don't have to bring in grants anymore. But they like to hang around.
Yeah, I know that's going to be pretty awesome. But yeah, that's what I wish that, do these webinars, do these things. Let's put more content out there that's easily accessible without the barrier to entry. And if we really say that we're really interested in educating the people, then we have to make it available and make it available at a cost that the average technician can buy it.
Yeah.
Because when you're making average $35,000 a year, there's not a whole lot left over to pay $200-300 for a course that your company isn't going to cover. I pay for my people's training. I tell them it's $200 for the day. I want you to go, and it costs me $1,200 to send them to training. But I can do that maybe once or twice a year. Yeah. But I can always send them a video and say, "Hey, watch this."
Yeah, and I'm the last one who will ever want to substitute webinars and videos for interpersonal interaction. I think that's just because of my personality, but there is value in it. There's nothing like face-to-face and being at the meetings and interacting, as far as I'm concerned. But it's a generational thing. Technicians for 3 days, you can't do that.
But here's what will happen, and I can appreciate it because I like going to conferences. But as busy as I am, I was doing this before COVID became a thing and webinars became a thing.
Yeah.
Because the Gen Xers are and the iGeners, this is native to them.
Yeah.
This is more acceptable than them going to a conference. When I go to the expo conferences, the only people that are there are owners. There's no technicians there at these expo conferences. They get 1 training a year, which is the CEU training, and they only in Florida only really requires that the owners will only send their technicians to take the 2-hour core. They're not going to send their technicians to take the core, the GHP, the termite, and spend 8 hours in a course. They only require to take 2 core a year. So this, if we say there's a problem in training in the industry, it's that where I have to be there face to face, but it's $1,200 a day to send a guy because you lose lost production. We're in the summer. We're behind schedule. You never catch up.
Yeah.
So this, I would rather a guy get the information he needs to make a good decision and get the training versus saying, if you don't come to my classroom, you're never going to learn. And I sit on my local advisory council for my county's extension service, and we have these conversations all the time. and I've been having the conversation for 9 years with them. They still won't record a conference and put it out, even though the information is good and solid.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, but you see, so this is the change that we need to start having, because you have 30 years of experience that if you were producing this content, even in retirement, you have so much to offer, yet how many conferences can you get to?
Yeah. Oh, I go to a lot of them.
But, let's say 20 a year maybe?
Yeah, more so I actually go to the training of the actual companies. I'll show up. I've shown up at 6 o'clock in the morning and given them an hour and a half of CEUs, and the trucks can still roll. I mean, I understand that.
Yeah. That's the thing. My appreciation for education. I'm one of those weird guys that doesn't have a graduate degree, but I have a massive amount of respect and admiration, and from those that do, because I depend on their knowledge and their experience, what they've done in the field and what the research they've done to give me solid advice. Then it's my responsibility to how do I turn that solid advice into a business opportunity.
Sure, yeah.
And that advice is worth more to me than the CEU. The CEU is worthless. You know what I do for CEUs? I'll be honest with you. I have a guy here locally that's Bullseye Environmental, and I'll give him a plug because he deserves it. He's been in the industry 35 years. His material is about as exciting as watching paint dry and water boil. But here's what I do. I will put that on for 8 hours and let it run, and then I'll just come back and take my exam because I know the answers. And
I don't think you're the only one doing that, by the way, just to let you know.
Okay, I figured. So there's no value there. It's for me to comply. Yep. But if you were putting out that information that you were doing at these classes, think about I just lost the train of thought on your marketing guys.
Chris,
putting out this content for marketing purposes for Catchmaster is invaluable.
Yeah, well, we're doing some of that, and that's what the Captain Stan page is about. There's not a lot of video stuff on there or webinars, but there's a absolute wealth of mosquito stuff. And since we advertise this as a mosquito talk, we probably ought to get the mosquitoes, or else we may not get any.
We'll be here for dinner. No, but I would sit there if you put out a video instead of a web graphic or whatever, and you taught something on it for 5-10 minutes. There's no reason I would sit there and devour everything you would put out, because I acknowledge that what you're giving is solid. Yeah. And this is where I would want to go to all the people that are in this industry to do this, because from a branding perspective and from a audience perspective, I can sit there and learn and also say, dang, he's the only one putting this out. I might as well just buy their products because he's the only one giving me the information. And that's how I get most of my customers anyway.
This is what Chris and I have talked about for the next phase of Captain Stan's life, is to take some of the written things and do, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10-minute quick and dirty videos on one topic. Yep. Here's the 3 key points to remember. Boom. And here's how you.
I love it. So there you go. Now everybody knows that you're committed to that, and we're going to get it done. I just suckered you into that. No, but let's talk about, by the way, before we get into that, and I want you to tell me where we get into the discussion of final feed, that I did a video, I don't know if you had a chance to watch it, on how to apply final feed. And what I've picked up, because I was using final feed, and I don't know if anybody knows about this, but I was buying the Terminex product over 2 years ago and testing it. And I was like, let me try it. It could work. There was only one supplier selling it at the time, and I would buy it.
I worked for them.
Which was, what was that? The supplier. They only sell Mosquito to government and everybody. And I would buy directly from them. What was their name? Or they're still around?
Well, my prior company had the exclusive rights for private industry pest control, and then there was another company called Adapco that had
Adapco. That's
which
who
was in Florida.
Yeah.
And they had the rights to government installations, the Caribbean, and somebody else. So that's back when it was called ATSB, and several people will remember the name ATSB.
Yeah. So that's what I started using it, and I started testing it and figuring it out because there wasn't any real info out there. I could not get anybody to tell me how to use this darn thing. So I just started experimenting. I found out what properties it worked on, what properties it didn't.
Let's go back to my Navy time now that we're into final feed and ATSB.
Yeah.
As I said, when I was the head bug guy, I ran a research program called the Deployed Warfighter Protection Program. Doesn't that sound impressive? The reason it was named that was because it was a line item in the congressional budget, and nobody would ever try to cut money out of something called Deployed Warfighter Protection. But it was $5 million a year, finding better ways to kill bugs and repel bugs. While I was administering that program, I gave the very first grant, this was probably in 2006 or 7, to the company in Israel that ended up developing, with the help of a lot of other groups, what became ATSB. So I gave the very first grant that developed that product, which has now morphed into final feed. So I've been with it ever since day one. And there was a vice president. We gave him the money, and there's sort of this valley of death in R&D where people work on stuff for a few years, and either they're not successful, or they come back and they say more research is needed or more money is needed, and then they want to do a little mission creep with what they originally were supposed to do. So I sort of lost sight of it, and I was still in the Navy, and one of the vice presidents for Terminex came by to visit for some reason, I forget why, and he said, "Hey, we want to send you some slides to look at," and I had to sign a confidentiality agreement and stuff about something we're looking at. Would you mind taking a look at it? He didn't tell me what it was.
Right.
So again, serendipity. I got the slide set and I opened it up, and he said, "Do you know anything about this?" And I said, "Yeah, I've been funding it for 3 years." So then Terminex got the exclusive rights. I went to the factory in Israel where it was produced. 2 days after I left, there were some missiles that landed about 100 feet from the factory where it was being made, because they were right on the border. So we had it for 3 years at Terminex, and three, I think. And then for reasons that I am not aware of or clear on, they decided to give up that exclusivity, and that's when Catchmaster picked it up. And one point I want to make is that for those who are familiar with ATSB, final feed is essentially the exact same formulation, but it's been greatly improved with a soybean protein additive, a soy protein, which increases the adhesiveness particularly in areas like Florida, where it rains almost every day. The adhesiveness now, when it's properly sprayed on plants, which is in and under the vegetation mostly, and applied to runoff, not spritzed like perfume.
Right.
It's to run off like this slowly.
Right.
60% of the material remains in place after approximately a 2-inch rainstorm. So it's essentially the same product, 9 ingredients, microencapsulated garlic oil. That now people shouldn't be misled. There are other garlic products on the market. Those are all repellents.
Yeah.
Final feed is the first ever bait for mosquitoes. And
so go back real quick. How many years have this ATSB till now has been like in development and being used in the market?
Yeah. Well, there was research in Israel for 25 years on a similar product to kill phlebotomine sandflies, which in the Middle East spread a horrible disease called leishmaniasis. And the reason it took so long was to try to find the correct date matrix.
Okay.
For instance, the major ingredient in final feed is syrup from dates, and the dates are grown in Israel.
Right.
That's the main ingredient. So it was trying to, because insects in nature, particularly mosquitoes, require every day multiple sugar meals from plants because, they fly.
Right.
Little cars, and they need that energy. So if you're going to put out something that you want to be a bait, it has to be able to compete with nature, with those natural sugar sources. And that's what took so long. That took years and years and years.
Right.
From the time I got involved, which I said was probably 2007, around that time, the product became available about 2014, I think.
Okay.
Normally it's, 7 to 10 years and hundreds of millions of dollars to develop these things. In this case, but it took quite a while, and there's been extensive field testing. There's a lot of peer-reviewed papers. A lot of times people have the next best this or that, and you ask them to see efficacy data, and they don't have it.
Right.
Well, Final Feed has it.
Yeah. No, I did a ton of research on it and was doing, when I looked at the product, I started pulling up the scholar data on it and said, man, there's a lot of research. So that's what I decided, because I'm one of those guys that I will try it. Most people won't unless they see somebody else using it. I immediately, when I found out it existed, and mostly because I stumbled across some studies that Phil Kohler was actually doing with some ATSBs and with boric acids and sugar that he had done. And I said, this is interesting. Let me see if there's anything else out there like it. And then I stumbled across the Terminex product, and that's when I started using it and testing it. So there's no question that the product works. It just requires this reset. Like people are, you put it in a backpack mister. No, it's a bait. That's why I did a video on how to actually apply, because the best data I had on how to apply it was that. How did I do, by the way, on that application video? In all honesty.
We discussed this. Overall, I'd give you an A-.
Okay.
But when you were sort of running along and going, apply here, that's why I said you have to stand and apply to runoff.
So more runoff and less spotting. I see. Originally, I thought it may be a spot because it's throwing this cone out, and I'm spying because I have no more. What I've discovered also is that the more foliage I have is in gardens that I have foliage all around, or I have a lot of foliage, I get the control. In gardens that I have very little foliage, it doesn't seem to work.
It's a question of being able to put out enough that the mosquitoes are going to find it. The field data would demonstrate, and again, these are biological parameters. So, I'll say about and roughly, maybe 10 to 12 feet away. That's why the mosquitoes will find it. That's why you can use it as a spot treatment, or you can use it as a barrier spray if you want to. I mean, the label has only one restriction on it, one do not, and that says do not apply to flowering vegetation.
Right.
So, and there's no retreat restrictions. A lot of times it'll say you can't retreat within X number of days, or you can only put out a certain amount of material per acreage. No restrictions on that.
Can you put it on other than foliage?
Yes.
Can you put it on? Because what I was thinking in my logic and reading the data, because there's no clear answer, it's best to apply to the foliage, not apply to porous surfaces or hard surfaces, because the mosquito naturally isn't going to go there. Is that right, or am I wrong in that?
That's a little bit of a myth. Captain Stan's big four are, and again, we're talking microclimate here, a little cooler, a little moisture, shade, and out of the wind, because mosquitoes are very delicate and they'll dry out, they'll desiccate and die. So if you think like a mosquito, whether it's a mosquito that just wants to rest or a female mosquito who is going to take 3 to 4 days to develop her eggs, cool, shaded, a little bit of moisture, and out of the wind. And that's what I pound into my training, is that's where the treatment should be targeted. You don't need to soak and hope or spray and pray the entire yard. You just don't need to do that, and very rarely.
So if I have a concrete surface that's in the shade, that is in a corner somewhere, I can apply to that concrete surface. It doesn't need to be applied to the foliage. No,
you can put it on. We recommend non-porous surfaces just because it'll absorb in. But one of the favorite places for mosquitoes to rest are under decks. Because why? It's cooler. It's shaded. There's moisture.
Right.
People almost always have standing water under their decks, right? And it's out of the wind, or under a shed, or one of my favorite things to talk about is what I call cryptic or hidden mosquito breeding sites. You might go onto a property and at first glance, you look around and you don't see kiddie pools. I'm talking now about the backyard container 80s like you have all over Florida now.
Yeah.
80s Egypti and the Asian tiger.
Yeah.
But then if you look a little harder, maybe there's a clogged gutter, or there may be a big pile of leaves. We had a situation in Florida one time at a property of a company about a mouse that you would recognize their name if I said it. And they had an outdoor fire pit with all these big tropical leaves in the corner, and water had actually collected in and under there, and it was enough to produce mosquitoes. So, there are these hidden sites that technicians don't always think about, tree holes, clogged gutters. And another huge one, and this is the point I was trying to get to, is, those corrugated expanding tubes that people attach to their downspouts to pull the water away from their house?
Yes.
You can pull them out real long or they collapse.
Yeah.
Even those almost always tip up and they get accumulation of something underneath them.
Right.
And you almost always find a little bit of water in there. That's like the Ritz-Carlton for a female mosquito, because it's cool, it's shaded, there's moisture in there, and it's out of the wind. So not only is she going to rest in there along with probably several of her friends, if you will, but she's also going to probably lay her eggs in there. And so in that case, you might want to spray a little bit up and under in there.
Got it. So anywhere
it takes a trained eye.
Right.
Sherlock Holmes said, Watson, we must be trained to see what others overlook. And I use that when I talk about inspections, because a proper inspection is the whole key, particularly to mosquito control.
Yeah, it's just like any pretty much anything is trying to identify, understanding the biology. So yep. I have down here,
and then use it against them, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole key, is not exactly, everybody's so focused on active ingredients and which is the best product. My thing has always been what situation, like that property that I did on, there's literally over 2,000 bromeliads holding water right adjacent to that property. That's been a nightmare. I've been able to control it with final feed more than I can with pyrethroids, because I've got water within 10 feet off that gate and I can't do a whole lot.
You can't get to the bromeliads?
The bromeliads are on the side of the home that's next to it. So what we do is we're using pyroproxyfen on the borderline, hoping that it will transfer because of the transferability of it. Yeah. And then that's what we're trying to bank on, is that we're going to probably incorporate the into care in conjunction with the final feed as an eco-friendly product, yeah. and use those two together.
By the way, you mentioned into care. I just want to let you know that if you haven't seen your most recent PCT magazine, Captain Stan the Mosquito Man has an excellent article in there all about mosquito traps, how they work, how some of them work, how they're different, what they cost, right, when to use them, how to use them. Brand new article. One of the best I've ever written, if I do say so myself.
Well, send me a link on it, because what I will do is I will put it in the show notes so that people can find it. Because they're going to say, they're going to call me and say, where's the link to the article he talked about? So that'll be great if we can just give that supporting documentation. So
yeah, if people just Google my last name, Cope, PCT and mosquito, I now have a series of 5 articles in there.
Excellent.
And I'll be very honest with you, they're written to be highly applied for technicians. How to do an inspection. What are the myths and fallacies that your customers believe about mosquitoes that they will say to you, Frank, I don't need your mosquito service because I eat garlic or because I have citronella candles.
Right.
How do you talk to them about things like that? There's the one on trapping. So there's a whole series of them in there that I think would be helpful to folks.
No, I will definitely get, I might just hunt all these links down and create a page on our site and put all those links up so people will have them very easily. And that would be something great. Let's talk about mosquito biology a bit, because I have, you did a little research that you put together, and they put out the little infographic on all the states and the number of mosquitoes that are in that state.
That was quite a project.
We won. So yay, Florida. We have more.
No.
We didn't win?
You're second.
Who's first?
Yes.
Texas.
Texas is correct. I ask this question in my classes all the time. The point is that mosquitoes are not equally distributed throughout the United States. They're not equally distributed within a state. And the key point is, going back to what we talked about earlier, they are not randomly distributed on a customer's property.
Okay, so talk to me about that not being randomly distributed on a customer's property. Explain that to me.
Well, it goes back to thinking like the mosquito of where they're going to want to be. And there's several aspects to it. I think of the different physiological stages of a mosquito as light switches. There's the blood feeding light switch that comes on. There's the resting light switch. And when one light switch is on, the others are all off.
Okay.
There's the resting while the eggs are developing. After a blood meal, a female mosquito can lay 150 to 200 eggs, but those eggs have to develop. And that takes roughly 4 days of just sitting very quietly. And during that time, she's not likely to feed or do anything. And then when it's time, when the egg laying light switch goes on, she goes around the property. And for these particular container breeders, by the way, the Asian tiger mosquito, which was found in Texas in the 1980s, has now spread to all or parts of 40 states. And it's the number one reason why mosquito control in private industry has turned into a pretty lucrative business. It's that one particular species.
Right.
It's not the diseases, it's that annoying thing. But she has a particular habit, and again, this is where you can use their biology against them. When these particular kinds of mosquitoes enter a customer's property, she doesn't go land in a bucket on the water or in a kitty toy or something and lay all her eggs directly in the water like most kinds of mosquitoes do. She goes around to as many containers as she can find on that property and puts 2, 3, 5 eggs in as many places as she can find. And that's called skip oviposition. It just means she skips all around the yard, and oviposition means laying eggs. It's a biological survival thing. The Culex mosquitoes don't do it. The Anopheles mosquitoes don't do it. It's this small group of container breeding Aedes. And if you have a bottle cap or one jar or something, it can produce enough mosquitoes to contaminate a whole yard or a whole neighborhood. It doesn't have to be a big body of water that's so obvious. Right. And so the point I'm trying to get to is there are certain traps, which we happen to make one of them, that if you have these on a customer's property, and this is the message of integrated mosquito management that I'm trying so hard to get out to our industry. So anyway, she's going to eventually fly around and she'll go in that bucket because it's a potential breeding site, right? And she gets caught. And if you catch one female mosquito, you're potentially taking out 1,200 new mosquitoes because she can do that egg laying thing about 6 to 8 times at about 150.
Right.
And there's a brand new study that just came out on these traps that show very clearly, and CDC is an author on this because they're the ones that developed the trap that we now sell, the Ovi Catch, which I think Chris talked about a little bit.
Yeah, I think so too.
You only have to remove 30% of the female mosquitoes to reduce the population up to 80%.
Interesting.
Now think about that. It's amazing. You don't have to get rid of all of them to make a substantial impact on it. So that's a good example of if you understand the biology. But going back to the overall point, there are lots of traps out there, and they're designed to do different things. And as it says multiple times in the article, the technician or the sales manager, or whoever may be doing this, needs to talk to their technical person, their distributors, people like me, and find out what exactly it is they want to do with their program, and then pick, because they all sort of look some of the same. A lot of them are black and plastic and this and that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we talk about, and I'll give you my case, I have these hard cases that I get, and this is particularly maybe South Florida. This is becoming more and more maybe in Arizona, but they don't have the same mosquito problems that we have here in South Florida where we're subtropical. Go ahead.
They actually, the Aedes aegypti, the yellow fever mosquito, is very high populations in Arizona, and they're having a very difficult time.
They are. Okay, see there?
Controlling it.
Yeah, so they've got...
The whole ecology of where they're breeding is different, but they do have them. These little boogers are tough. I mean, the yellow fever mosquito has been around for thousands of years.
Yeah, I know. I was actually doing a whole study on it going all the way back to Cuba in the turn of the century, and then going into I lost you again.
I'm here.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, so doing a study where I was all the way for the yellow fever mosquito in Cuba, where they finally discovered what had happened, and then into the Panama Canal and that whole history of it, which I just find totally fascinating.
I've actually published that, and I'm one of the world's authorities on that history of yellow fever and what happened with the Walter Reed group. I'm sure you read about that.
Yes.
The very first, you'll get a kick out of this, the very first Army soldier who volunteered to be bitten in what became the controlled experiments, there was some preliminary stuff where a couple of people died. The very first soldier named John Kissinger, who volunteered to be bitten and got the disease but did not die, is from the same little town I'm from in Indiana.
Oh, wow.
And he's buried about 60 feet from my parents in the same cemetery.
Yeah, no, I was reading that whole story, and I've got I've got like some PDFs that are like 200 pages on it.
If you can see behind me, there's a picture of Abraham Lincoln up there.
Yeah.
The other poster says "Yellow Fever: The Scourge Revealed." That's the name of my talk. I've been giving it for 25 years, and I still give it. And it centers on what the volunteers in Cuba actually went through.
Right.
It's published too. I mean, you can find it easily if it's something you want to throw up. But those folks were heroes for what they did.
Yeah. No, I mean, the amount of people that died during that time doing the testing. The amount of doctors that were there on that Walter Reed group that just passed away from it and being bitten. One, right? There was the nurses and...
I've also published about Clara Moss, the nurse, who was in some follow-up experiments.
Okay, so see that's just... Most people don't understand it, that there's a history and understanding that history. I'm just a history buff, so for me it's exciting. To some people it's about as exciting as... I'll
send you a couple things to read. You'll get a kick out of them.
Sweet. I would love it. I would love it. And so one of the challenges that I have going back there, because I know my train is going to derail. I know it. It's going to be a mess. So I'm going back to this, and we have what are known as the cookie cutter communities. And we have these cookie cutter communities that are 6 to 8,000 square foot lots on average. And we always get calls to get mosquito control on those types of properties. And I find it to be the most difficult thing in the world because we have storm drains literally 50 feet from that property on the sidewalk. And there's, 300 storm drains going around this property. There's the bromeliads being planted. There is all the pots and pans that people are putting out with, their flower pots. The pools, I've got literally 150 pictures that I've taken over the last 2 years that I'm going to do a whole documentary on the most difficult cases and why we're having this. Bird baths being abandoned. And
one of the biggest offenders, going back to cryptic breeding sites, and I just want to throw this thought into my mind, the drainage saucers that people like in those communities put under their plants.
Yes, exactly.
The eggs of the Asian tiger and Aedes aegypti can live unhatched in those drainage saucers for a year or more after they're laid.
Yep. And that's, people don't get it, that, hey, we went away and whatever dried up and then all of a sudden it gets filled with water again. And
5 days later, they're calling you.
Yeah. So those are the challenges that we're having in getting called. And what they're having is the traditional franchise mosquito company going out and misting everything. And they're like, it isn't working. And it's like, you've got this much property, you have all these elements around you, these 150 points, gutters, everything, and we're trying to get this control. And what I found with most success is the combination of IGR with the bait in properties that have heavy foliage. We're getting the control. Now we're getting it down here. It's lasting for me on average about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I've not been able to do the 30 days on most properties even with that tactic.
One of the things I would suggest is most likely the mosquitoes you're dealing with are a combination of the southern house mosquito, which is the main West Nile mosquito in the eastern United States. They're going to be breeding in the foul water in the drainage systems and things like that. And maybe if somebody happens to have an abandoned swimming pool or something like that.
Right.
Then you have both species of the backyard container breeders. So the places where they're breeding is totally different. However, I would think about incorporating some traps there, not necessarily the into care, because and the into care has its benefits. I've written on this, and as I said, traps do different things. But if you think about how that trap works, where the female's supposed to pick up the fungus and go contaminate the other breeding sites, well, our job as technicians is to not have breeding sites on that property, right?
Right.
We should be able to clean them up. So, there are other traps that the egg-laying females will go into, and those are the ones we're trying to get at, the egg-laying females. And the culex will go in them, and the backyard container breeders will go in the same trap. So one of the problems that you're going to have is female mosquitoes coming onto a property, whether you've treated it or not, because they fly.
Right.
And so if they're flying, they're either looking to feed, which brings them in contact with customers, or they're looking for a place to lay their eggs. And if you can intercept them when they're laying their eggs before they find something else on that property, and as you know, down there in the summer, it rains probably almost every day in 50 or 60% of the areas.
Yeah, we just got
something in the customer's yard is going to get water in it. I mean, It's just inevitable. So, this goes back to me harping about integrated mosquito management instead of just, as you said, spraying the yard and hoping that you kill stuff, because that's not the solution.
Yeah, we found it doesn't work for us. We've used the synthetic for a long while, but again, 2 weeks max, and then we're back at it again. I mean, the people are creating the biggest problem that we have in the challenge that we have in integrated mosquito management, which I totally believe in, and I'm an IPM buff, and we've been able to do so many things with IPM because we push it. But it's when you got a 6,000 square foot property and the breeding site is not on that property.
Yep.
That's the challenge that we're having, where the next door neighbor doesn't care that he has the buckets full of water, that he doesn't care that he has the plates, he doesn't care that he has bromeliads, and you're less than 50 feet from each other. So those are the big challenges. That's why I'm more finding with the traps and with the bait, because I've been able to get better control because of these complex issues.
Yeah.
With that. The only complaint I've gotten about the buckets and using the OVO, the trap, the Catchmaster makes, is that it's $1 million property and it looks like you have a bucket sitting in the corner.
Well,
that's the biggest complaint I've gotten, which I wish they would make something that was more decorative, and that would be great.
We are.
That's what I've been wanting.
It's going to be called the Ovi planter.
Okay.
And it's going to look like something that somebody bought to put out in their yard.
That's what we would need, because, like I said, the people that are willing to pay for this kind of service are the top 10% of the moneymakers, where they want the control. And when we put it out, like if we have really big properties, not a problem because we can hide it. But on these types of properties, that's been a huge issue for us.
I know exactly the type of properties you're talking about. It's probably the stucco walls, and may not be a lot of vegetation, but on most properties you can find a place to put at least one or two, so it's sort of out of view, which is where the mosquitoes are going to be anyway. But I know that sometimes you can't. Yeah,
when we got open properties with pavers and pools, and there's no place to, people like a bucket in my backyard, not appealing. That's been our challenge.
One thing to remember, we one of the big four. What are the big four, Frank? Come on, tell me what you've learned.
The big four of
Captain Stan's big four.
Yeah, so it's damp, shade, cool, and hold on, damp, shade, cool, and no wind.
Floor fans are excellent to recommend to your customers. A
floor fan
when they're sitting outside on low.
Yep.
That really helps keep mosquitoes away. Not ceiling fans. A lot of these properties will have ceiling fans where they sit outside.
Right.
Doesn't work.
Okay,
and
so
another key question to ask your customers is this: what time of the day are you being bitten?
Right.
And if the answer is, well, the kids go in the backyard at 2:00 and they come back in after an hour and they have these terrible welts, generally from their knees down, that tells you that it's backyard container breeders, and you've got to look around, because the females of those mosquitoes fly less than 100 yards from the water that they breed in. Now, given they could be coming from the neighbor next door, I get that. That's an opportunity to go make a sale as far as I'm concerned, but I'm not a salesperson.
Yeah, I know, but that is the majority of the concern.
It's primarily during the evening when we sit outside. That's probably Culex or Anopheles, and those are more likely to be flying in from someplace else.
And that's the hardest ones I have. That's one of the, because people want to be outside at 9, 10, smoking a cigar, hanging out, doing grilling, whatever.
Smoking a cigar will help.
Yeah. That's what I do. I'm out here sometimes in my house, and it's 10 o'clock at night. I'm getting clobbered. What I've learned is I'll just go out and start putting out the product, and that's usually when it'll go down for several weeks with no problem. But it's been that for me. My experience has been 2 weeks.
Here's another tip, and this is another one of the biggest mistakes that we as an industry make. Somebody's got a bucket, and it's full of mosquito larvae. What do we tell them to do?
Dump it.
Dump it and do what? Flip it over.
Yep.
Just flip it over so it won't collect water.
Right.
Every bucket's got a lip about this big on the bottom of it.
Yep.
And that fills up. And believe it or not, the life cycle of the same with recycling containers, kiddie pools. If they stand them up on edge, which we tell them to do, that rim that goes around it down at the bottom about this wide is going to collect water.
Yep.
And that water heats up more. Once you get nutrients in it, the life cycle of the mosquitoes will actually go faster because there's good nutrients and the water is warmer. So sometimes a wheelbarrow is the same thing.
Turn it over, you got that lip. Yep. So those are the things that so basically if the water can heat up and have more organic matter in there, or whatever nutrients from anything in the yard, then that makes it just more attractive for them to go lay their eggs in there. Then if the pool was actually full of water.
The tarp, people cover lots of things with tarps, right? Motorcycles, barbecues. Yep. As soon as that tarp sags a little bit and it collects rain in there and gets just a little bit of debris, that water is going to get really hot. And I'm making a circle this big. That's enough to contaminate a whole property because it'll produce where you live and in the warmer parts of the country. The entire life cycle of these backyard container breeders can be completed in 5 to 7 days. Egg to adult in only 5 to 7 days. I mean, the textbooks, by the way, one of my favorite sayings is mosquitoes don't read the textbooks. You can quote me on that.
Yeah.
they don't know that they're not supposed to go breed in gutters because, they stay within 10 feet of the ground. Not if that's not available to them. They'll find all these other ways to do it.
Right. They'll adapt. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So what's the, in our case where maybe Texas, California, probably the biggest states where you were going to get the most calls for mosquito, just based on population. What are you finding as far as best practices across, maybe from the Northeast and the Southeast? Is there different best practices based on what they're dealing with as far as species?
Yeah, absolutely. And just let's back up to what you said. Some states have much more sophisticated tax-based mosquito control than others do. Mm-hmm. With the spray truck that comes through the neighborhood. And as a matter of fact, one of my very, very dear friends is the operations manager for the Miami-Dade County Mosquito Control. She just moved down there about a year ago. So if I can ever get down there to see you, you're in Miami, right?
I'm in Miami, yeah. I drive by there. Most of our clients, they're like near Doral, which is Miami, on 79th, on 74th Street. They're right there. So I know exactly where they're at.
I'll get you a behind-the-scenes tour of it. That's fascinating what they do.
Oh, sweet.
But Florida, California, and Texas have some of the most and best mosquito abatement districts. And what happens is, particularly in your state, when somebody tries to sell a mosquito service, the answer is, don't you know that we pay taxes and we have a local mosquito abatement district here and they do the control for us? Well, right. For the container breeding mosquitoes, what the mosquito abatement districts do is not as effective as we would like it to be, because when does that truck spray? In the evening. These mosquitoes are active primarily during the daytime. In the evening, when that truck's driving through the neighborhood, they're sequestered away somewhere, sometimes even in the house. And also the fog and I'm not what the professional mosquito control people do, they do very, very well. It's very professionally done. I'm just saying that there's a whole group of mosquitoes that are not highly affected by those techniques because they're primarily out during the daytime. And that's where private industry comes in, because they have access to people's yards. They can go in during the day and treat the cool, dark, moist, and out of the wind places like that. So it's really great to partner with your local mosquito abatement district. They have maps of where they spray. They have maps of where they're larviciding. And it can help our industry folks maybe target their business a little better, because there are large areas, like here in Chicago, there are huge areas where there's no organized mosquito control. You'd think there would be, but there's not. And once the companies know where mosquito control is being done and where it's not being done, they're targeting some of their sales and service there and being a little more successful.
No, that is brilliant, because I had never thought. I mean, I get so many calls. What I tell people is, listen, you've got a lot of drains around this area. Have anybody contacted mosquito control? Give them a call. Have them check the drains. A lot of the time, that solves it when they just go and do that. And then, because as far as I know, maybe you can shed some light on this. If you've got drains, I know they can treat the drains with BTI, with the dunks.
Or there's other larvicides too.
Or other larvicides, but BTI is one of the common ones that, and because I work for a city and I do work, and the city told them to go ahead and just take the BTI dunks and put them all around their city and do it. Are we allowed to treat those for clients? We're not, right? That's what I've been told. I can't find the law. I've been trying to contact mosquito control, but because of all this Zika, coronavirus thing, everybody's pretty much on down low. But I've from what I know, you cannot treat it. That is county property, and it's in our case, it's under DERM in our county, so we can't touch them. But that would be what most of the time they have to do.
How about another piece of history for you about mosquito control from something you just brought up? BTI was discovered, Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis.
Right.
It was discovered in the Negev desert by a guy named Joel Margalit. And there was a microbiologist visiting him whose son was doing something in Israel. That civilian microbiologist happened to work for the United States Navy. So the Secretary of the Navy is listed on the original patent application for BTI as one of the 2 patent holders.
That's super sweet, man.
Secretary of the Navy.
So I noticed you mentioned Israel a couple of times. There's a lot of research going on in Israel, and especially with mosquito. Is that a huge problem in Israel too? Or is it just that the research is done there because of the people that are there?
Don't make the mistake of thinking that just because a place is a desert, they don't have mosquitoes.
Right.
There are 2 or 3 major universities in Israel, and their names aren't important. I mean, you could look them up, who have very, very rich histories of research on vector-borne diseases, particularly that leishmaniasis that I talked about. I mean, that's an ancient disease. When a woman, the lobotomine sandflies bite, and one of the forms of the disease can cause a disfiguring scar on the face. It's a big open wound that looks awful. If a woman got that and it was visible, she would never marry.
Wow.
In ancient society. So
got it.
They learned to take a little material out of a lesion from one person and maybe put it in a place where somebody won't be able to see it. And then the woman would be immune. So it goes way back in history. But
interesting.
Also, in the Middle East, those same sandflies transmit a thing called sandfly fever, which is a virus. And it was very, very impactful during World War II on a lot of troops. So
got it.
And also mosquitoes. I mean, Egypt has malaria, even though it has a desert environment. There's malaria in Egypt, for instance, and some in Israel at that time. So to get back to your original question, which I actually remember, yes, different techniques are more useful than others in certain parts of the country and are stressed more. There are some mosquito abatement districts that do almost nothing but larviciding.
Okay.
And a lot of it's aerial, and your state's one of them because of the salt marshes. There are some mosquito abatement districts that do no spraying for adults whatsoever. It's all inspections and larviciding. There are other places where they have helicopters and planes that are frequently up spraying for adults. There are parts of the country, particularly in the Northeast and along the Atlantic seaboard, where they do a lot of barrier sprays with pyrethrins, because they have so much more vegetation. Then if you go out west, there's not as much vegetation. I mean, if the average home in Arizona probably has absolutely nothing you can spray ATSB on or final feed. So there's a lot of trapping going on, a lot of source reduction, but we're finding out now that these mosquitoes are breeding in the sewers of Chicago. What we used to say they would never overwinter here because they're tropical species. They spend the winters now down in the sewers underneath the city of Chicago.
Wow.
They're tough. The
I know.
super mosquito has gone right up the Sacramento Valley in California and is just now south of San Francisco, and they can't stop it. And they have some of the best mosquito control people in the world there. And it's moving straight north.
So even in cold climates, because that's way up there, that's already cold.
Now remember, you live in Miami, so you might think it's cold in San Francisco.
Yeah.
That's
I know, because I've actually been to San Diego, and it was really cold, and I was like, man, it's cold in San Diego. I mean, here it's 80-degree Christmas. So that's to me when I go, and I lived in the Midwest. I lived in Ohio in Columbus I lived there for like 7-8 years.
Columbus was a great city.
Yeah, it is. I loved it in Columbus. I lived down in Dayton, and then I lived in northern Kentucky, right across from Cincinnati, and then
Covington?
and then just moved my way north to Columbus, and that's where I stayed before I came back to Miami. So I'm used to the winters, but realizing that it's supposed to be California, and it's it looks tropical, and you're there, and it's like, man, it's cold, and you go up to the San Bernardino Mountains, and there's snow. When I first saw that, I was like, wow, this is awesome, And then you look down at Palm Springs, and it's like, it's a strange place to be in, where
you referenced that new map that we just finished. That was an amazing project, and what we're talking about is it shows by state in the United States the variety of how many species by state.
Yeah,
and the fewest are Hawaii. There are only 8. The most is Texas with 85. 68% of our states have between 40 and 60 different kinds of mosquitoes.
Right.
But I started that project. That had never been done. Nobody had ever done that. My wife ended up having to help me do the research on it because we got down to like 5 or 6 states where we just couldn't find 2 sources that agreed with each other. And agreement means there are about 50 or about 60. Nobody knows exactly for sure.
Right.
The last state to pin down was Arkansas, by the way. That's another trivia question. But just one look at that map, which I'm going to hopefully publish in a couple months in PCT magazine or somewhere. It just shows you the diversity and the, again, this thought that they're not randomly distributed across the country. The number one answer is always Florida. I think Florida will have the most. But if you think of the biodiversity in a place like Texas, from Houston all the way up north and then out to the west, there's much more biodiversity there than there is in a state like Florida, which is mostly kind of the same ecosystem, except, a little bit up north and out west. So more diversity promotes more different types of breeding sites, and the different mosquito species are able to adapt better.
Right. No, I when I start doing, the more, like I said, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know anything. And it's just trying to help people, because people are going on groups. Groups are big. And trying to, what are you doing for mosquito? And what are you doing for mosquito? And you're doing this and you're doing that. And what you're doing is not working. And yeah, we're sharing great information, but everybody ignores the biology. Everybody just wants to get into the chemical part. And every time I try to interact, it's like, yeah, what mosquito do you have? I don't know. I'm just, spraying, and it's spraying with bifin is not working. I'm like, well, you got to find out why.
Let's just make a really important point here while you're on this, Frank.
Yeah.
insecticide resistance in mosquitoes is a huge, huge issue. And in this country, we really don't have a handle on it.
Yep.
If companies are using the same products year in and year out on the same properties, the resistance is going to skyrocket. So people really need to think about either rotating in something natural like final feed, or there's other products out there.
Yeah.
Or looking at some of the pyrethroids that have a little bit different chemistry. The people that make these products and that are required to re-register these, what we call public health insecticides, are deciding in some cases to not do it because it's so expensive to re-register or to develop a new active ingredient, maybe $300 million and take 10 or 12 years to find a new AI. We're losing these mosquito control products. We have just a handful of them left. I'm not talking about larvicides. We have excellent larvicides.
Right.
But for the adults and particularly for the barrier sprays. So I would encourage every company to look at rotating every couple of years and just using different things to try to help head that off. Yeah,
I know. It's just that it comes down to, it's frustrating because what you see the majority of people, we tend to talk a good game and we understand what we should be doing. But the reality is when you've got bifenthrin at 49 cents a gallon to make it, and you're going to charge $35 because you're competing with these large franchise brands, everybody is, what can I use that's cheapest? I mean, when I use final feed, that is not cheap to use per 1,000 square feet compared to.
Correct.
So my profit margin is extremely less, but it's based on our brand identity, and we're having to do it at about the same price to compete because that's the reality. You can't be 30 to 50% and justify it to everybody. It's only going to be the 1% you can justify to that says, I don't want any toxicant on my property, and you're my guy. Yeah. So when we're talking about the most used, which is bifenthrin, used for everything, we've got a serious problem in our hands that people don't understand, and then they're going to complain when the product doesn't get re-registered or gets taken away. We're crying about it, but at the other end of the spectrum, the habit doesn't change because it's still the cheapest thing you can buy.
I can tell you that there's probably some good news on the horizon. There's been there's a group called the Innovative Vector Control Consortium, IVCC, and funded partially by Gates and some other things. But they have now for probably 10 years at least, it's a huge effort to find new active ingredients for mosquito control. Now, the target is malaria, particularly in Africa.
Right.
But they're to the point now where they really are coming up with some innovative things that I can't really mention. But the future could be very, very bright when it comes to maybe some new products for mosquito control, which eventually will make their way to private industry in the United States.
Yeah, because I know, for the most part, organophosphates are gone, which are still used. In some parts, they still are spraying areas with organophosphates.
Malathion and dibrome are still used, particularly for aerial sprays. As a matter of fact, part of the big controversy down where you live when Zika hit was whether to do the aerial spray. I'm sure you remember all that.
Yeah. Then it was organophosphate that they were going after.
That was the year I was president of the American Mosquito Control Association. Talk about bad timing. And they kept wanting me to make a statement about what was happening in Miami as well as Puerto Rico, where the governor said there will be no aerial spraying. And I was able to say with confidence that, well, we don't have any people on the ground there and I don't know what's going on. So therefore, I'm not going to make a statement on behalf of the association.
Right. Yeah. We get into the politics and the whole feelings and what everybody feels like without the science, because we do have a large population of, most of my clients, I have to educate them on what they can realistically. I talk myself out of more sales than I make because I realize their expectation of the client is not in line with the science, the biology, and what the product can actually deliver. And you want to be able to go out at 6 a.m. and have coffee, go out and have in the pool at noon and be out at 10 o'clock smoking a cigar and never get bit. And I said, we're not going to deliver that.
That's unrealistic, but you're exactly right. And that's one of the biggest battles. There are companies here in Chicago that have billboards right on the main freeway past O'Hare Airport if you buy our service, you'll never see another mosquito in your yard again.
Yeah, and then we can't. And then so people we're selling against the marketing, and the marketing always wins. This has always been, marketers understand what people want, and they give them what they want. They just can't deliver it. I mean, it's just, so only a certain percentage of people are going to be happy. What I tell people here, which I'm still not a fan of, I've never been a fan of, is mosquito misting systems. And I know that Mosquito Association isn't a fan of them either. But when a client says, I've got a $2-3 million property and I don't care, that's the reality of they want that service. And I said, I can't deliver you a service unless you have a misting system. The only thing we've been able to do to buffer that is to use a product that we use down here called Naprovit, which is nothing more than, I believe, sodium lauryl sulfate, and then either soybean oil or cottonseed oil.
Sounds like a repellent or something.
Well, actually it is, and what it does is just a desiccant, but it has to be sprayed like 8-9 times a day because it has no residual at all. So the system is constantly going on. So you got to get a 200-gallon system installed that you can service once a month because it's going on every day, 7-9 times a day throughout the night, to just knock down, because it's just oil and it just clogs the spiracles and desiccates the exoskeleton.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing that's been approved.
You're talking like an entomologist here, man. I'm going to make you you know what a person's called who studies mosquitoes? It's a great name.
No, I don't.
Mosquitoes are in the family Culicidae.
Okay.
So I'm a culicidologist.
You're a culicidologist.
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 Yep.
Swell. So
after this interview, I'm going to, by the power invested in me, Pater Sancti Spiritu, I'm going to make you an amateur culicidologist.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the honor. I will wear, and I will proudly display it.
Culicidologist. 6 syllables.
Culicidologist. There you go.
Culicidologist.
I just learned a brand new term, and I've been indoctrinated into I've been knighted by the king.
Knighted by Captain Stan. What an honor.
What an honor. That'll be great, man. So Captain Stan, what else would you want to communicate that we haven't talked, that's been burning in your heart ever since we started this conversation?
I think you're better looking on Zoom than I am.
I don't know. That depends. I think that's subjective. Art is always subjective.
Here's one of the ways that I end a couple of my talks. And I get sort of very quiet, which after an hour of ranting and raving and gesticulating, you can gesticulate in public and get away with it.
Right.
And the slide says one more thought. And then I walk through the audience and I try to look each of these technicians in the eyes. And I tell them that, I set the scene. It's a hot day. You're on your last stop. You're sweating. Maybe it's Friday. Maybe you're going to go back to your yard like I do and have a couple cold ones and relax a little bit. Just remember that last treatment or that last inspection that you do that day might be the one that kills a mosquito that might transmit Zika virus to a young woman and cause her 9 months of incredible mental anguish about whether she's going to have a deformed child. You might kill the single Culex mosquito that maybe transmits West Nile to one of our senior citizens who no longer then can walk or talk. Or you might kill a tree hole breeding mosquito that transmits La Crosse encephalitis or Eastern equine encephalitis to a teenager and leaves them totally debilitated for the rest of their life. And we can't ever prove that that's what we do. But I'm convinced that on a daily basis across this country, when private industry folks are doing mosquito control, they're preventing illness and they're saving lives. We can't measure it very easily, but there's no doubt that when we're doing what we're doing, people buy quality of life and they buy peace of mind from us.
Yep.
That's what they want, no matter what the pest is.
Right.
And in the case of mosquito-borne diseases or tick-borne diseases, there's really that whole public health component that enters in. And so it's pest control in general is a very noble profession, but when you're making your best effort to kill these vectors of these horrible diseases, I applaud them. And I try to ask them to remember that on every stop that they make, and to not rush through it.
Yep,
but then, the almighty revenue stream comes in there, and they have to, I have 5 minutes to get to my next stop, and it's 20 miles away. I get it.
I know. Yeah, it's that's the tough part about what a lot of, and this is what discourages a lot of people in the industry that have worked, especially for larger brands, when there are 15, 20 stops and they have no time to care. I mean, it's just sad. And a lot of us that do care, like my guys are on 6 to 8 stops a day. And guys, if you can't get to all of them, we'll have to try to get them tomorrow, but we can't do that. And we can't be on that production mentality. You have to, because that's the callback, that's the complaint, that's the customer care issue that then we have to handle. Yeah. And it's just, that's a balancing act on a daily basis for us.
Yeah. My favorite phrase that I teach is talk to your customers about nuisance reduction.
Yeah.
Don't ever use the word eradication, or never. It's nuisance reduction.
That's
you may still get a few bites, but that's because these are mosquitoes and they fly. I mean, most people will get that. Now, do they understand it and hear it the next day when they're outside? A lot of times it's call back to Frank and say, I got bitten. I want you to come back out.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's one of the hardest sells down here that we have is, and we're getting them now where we're getting them all throughout the year. It used to be we would get a break. We're starting to get people wanting mosquito control all year long. So we're switching like on a monthly basis in the winter, but we're still out there because they still have them, and then going every 2 weeks in the summer. Yeah. And that's another thing that we have to sell against is that the company is selling a once a month service.
But see, there's a good explanation for why you do what you do. And this goes back to that timing of the life cycle.
Yeah.
10 days to 2 weeks. Let's say you treat a property and you do a good inspection and, you turn over things and et cetera, et cetera. Well, let's say the next day there's a thunderstorm, which there probably is going to be. By the time you're back out there are probably adult mosquitoes that have emerged on that property again. So wait a month, that cycle can happen 3 times or so at least. So every 2 weeks from that point of view, particularly if you're stressing the inspections, and, mosquitoes are a lot easier to kill when they're in the water than when they're out flying around.
Right. He's very anxious.
You've got one buzzing around you there.
I know. He's a handful.
I get it. And God bless him. And that's his job. Abraham Lincoln used to let his kids bring their animals into the Oval Office. I mean, they're live animals. Yeah. One of his sons used to ride through the Oval Office on a small horse in the middle of a cabinet meeting. So there's no violation of anything from what I see down there.
Yeah, no, he's done. And we're keeping him home from school today, and because they've been trying to do the school thing, but they want him to wear masks. Yeah. And starting that whole issue and getting him, he's super hyperactive. I mean, I've got him in karate. He does somersaults. He's got every skinned leg. I mean, he's got more scars on his legs than I have.
That's a little boy's job description, by the way, in case you didn't read. Yeah,
and he's me on steroids. I mean, he is.
That's frightening.
Yeah, he's nonstop. From the time he wakes up, he wakes up at 6:30 in the morning, and he'll go to bed at 10:30. I can't get him to bed before 9:30. Can't do it. He's still going around, turning around, and so I've learned that that's how he's wired. I just got to try to keep him active and do more stuff.
Is there anything else that on your mind that you want to talk about or bring up? There's sort of like 4 or 5 of the most common questions that I get that. Like why are some people bitten more often than others and stuff like that. But
I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and let's probably get together again because there's so many. There's a lot of questions that I have from an entomological perspective that I want to cover. But I think we've been on for almost an hour and a half or so. And then I want to.
We're 15 minutes short of 2 hours, my friends.
Yeah. so we got a lot to talk about, and I would definitely.
Our audience may not feel the same. You may have to condense this down to like 30 seconds where we really talked about mosquitoes, but that's their problem, not ours.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Then my guys that love what we do understand it, and they love this. But I will make micro content from this and edit it down and do 30-minute segments and 2-minute segments and 3 minutes and just distribute that. all over. But you know,
¿Cómo se llama de su niño?
Alejandro. Come here. You want to say
Alejandro.
hi? You want to say hi? No. Okay, he wants his mommy. His mommy's out working, so he's stuck with me, and I'm here. So yeah, we definitely need to. I want to cover a lot, especially different mosquito biology, the difference on, you know, Culex and Aedes and Anopheles, and cover a lot of those things that people need to know. But
Sure.
That would be more on the CEU type of. Here's the raw data, here's the information, and get into some deep data on stuff that we assume that are misconceptions and things like that. I think, because I see that so much, a lot of people don't have the clue of that you have different mosquitoes and there's different behavior.
Is not a mosquito is not a mosquito.
Exactly. It's not like roaches, and it's more, you know, it's just totally different. And I see a lot, and I think that information is needed. And I think
I'd be happy to do it anytime you want.
Yeah, just book it whenever you feel like booking another segment that you have time on your calendar.
Okay.
Yeah, just go back online, book it any day you want to. I'll have you back on. You're a hoot.
Well, I've never seen in any job description that you can't have fun.
Yep. Nope. I'm like that all the time. I'm trying to have, because if I don't enjoy it, it's not going to happen for me. So I wake up every day wanting to do what I do, not because I have to. So
and when you're in front of an audience, if you don't enjoy it,
yep,
you're not going to educate them.
No, it's not going to happen. Then they're going to perceive it, and perception is reality, unfortunately.
Let's pull out all the cliches we can while we sign off here.
Yes, sir. Let's just throw them all out there. So anyway, on the
sir again, by the way.
I know, Stan. I know it's an old habit, and I'm getting older, so it's harder to break.
I'm going to send you some of my history stuff for you to read if you want to post the stuff.
That'd be great.
Access the stories of what some of these people went through and made the ultimate sacrifice to further our profession. And it was only 140 years ago. We're not talking very long ago.
Yeah, it isn't. And no, that was just fascinating for me to read that whole history of how that transition from Cuba, from a historical perspective, solved the problem in Panama. That we couldn't build that canal, and Gorgas, yes, and so that the whole thing is just fascinating. If you like history, and especially bug history, I recommend people to look into that, because it does open your eyes.
There's a good friend of mine named Bob Peterson at Montana State University. If you Google diseases in history, he's got a website with a whole bunch of some of my presentations, some by a colleague of mine named Joe Conlon. There's a great one about the impact of typhus on Napoleon. Disease in history, and look for a Montana State. I think it's Montana State University website. There's some great stuff on there.
Yeah. Nope. I'm gonna look into it, because I do a lot of studying. I'm not gonna go out and at my age and get my PhD, so I just rather get the education, and I'll let the certificate for somebody else. I am about knowledge, and I learned that education is not necessarily the degree, but and for my case, I was never one of those brilliant students. I was just always thinking about what I could do more than.
One of my professors at UCLA was very fond of telling us the difference between information and knowledge. A lot of people have a lot of information, but they never convert it to knowledge, which is more useful.
Yep, that's what I've been focusing on. So yeah, he's here. You want to talk,
Alejandro?
Look, talk to Dr. Cope. ¿Cómo
estás, Alejandro?
So so we're gonna go. I'm gonna go make him lunch now, because he's
good for you.
He eats lunch.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
So much, man.
I said, I've been really excited about this, and I can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, so definitely I'm gonna redo that video with more runoff. That's
you running around, the product running off.
Yeah, so that's what I'm gonna do. So that, because I have another sprayer that I do have a fan tip on that does cover the entire leaf. This one has a cone, and what I do is I run it and cover it. But I'm gonna try it with the other one and see if I'll get better control on that.
Beautiful.
I appreciate it so much for being on.
And thank you for your support. We really appreciate it.
No, I love your company, and I love what you guys do. And you're one of my top 3 favorite companies in history.
Muchísimas gracias, amigo.
Muchas gracias a usted.
Hasta
la nueva.
Bye-bye.
Hasta luego.